I've noticed something with video game franchises that have been around for a long time. Almost all of them end up with communities that go one of two ways. They're either pretty laid back or they get really toxic. And I don't mean passionate, I mean exhausting. I've been playing Rocket League since 2016, so I've seen what an actually toxic community looks like, especially once you hit those higher ranks, and weirdly enough, Assassin's Creed kind of ended up in a similar spot, which is a strange thing to say because it's a single player series. There is no competitive ladder or, a big ranked mode, yet the conversations around this video game franchise feel just as hostile sometimes. And I think a big part of that comes down to how long Assassin's Creed has been around. We've seen this happen before though. A great example is Resident Evil. After RE6, it felt like the fanbase completely lost faith in the franchise. The community was split, with longtime fans saying the franchise had lost its identity, and newer fans defending the direction it was going. Now for a while, it genuinely felt like Resident Evil did not know what it wanted to be anymore, and neither did the people playing it. A lot of that frustration got aimed at Capcom too, because fans felt like the studio had stopped listening, and then Resident Evil 7 came out and almost overnight, the tone changed. It didn't please absolutely everybody, but it re-established a clear identity. People might still argue about the first person versus, the third person, but the core of what Resident Evil was supposed to feel like was back. The RE community calmed down because the franchise finally picked a direction again. Assassin's Creed never really had that reset moment. It's been, almost 20 years at this point. You've got people who grew up with the early games, people who jumped in around Black Flag, and people whose first experience was the RPG era. Almost all of them fell in love with a completely different version of what Assassin's Creed even is. So every discussion kind of turns into this quiet tug of war over what the series is supposed to be. I don't think the discourse ever really stops either. It's always old games versus newer games. It's always the modern day versus no modern day. And the word nostalgia getting tossed around like it explains everything. You will see it everywhere, in comment sections on YouTube videos, on Reddit, on Twitter, and even recently I started noticing it on TikTok too. A few months ago I downloaded TikTok because I was curious what Assassin's Creed content even looked like over there. I already had a feeling it was going to be a lot different, mostly because TikTok is primarily a younger audience platform, and everything on TikTok moves at lightning speed. And yeah, that's exactly what I found. I saw these cool Assassin's Creed edits, and a lot of 30 to 60 second clips where somebody would voice their opinion on the franchise. But what surprised me though was how different the vibe felt compared to YouTube, which is where I post. TikTok did not feel like the same community at all. Now maybe that's an age thing, maybe it's just how the platform works. I honestly do not know, but it made me start thinking about why Assassin's Creed discussions feel so broken, no matter where you look. So in this video, I want to talk through that. I don't want to prove one side is right and one side is wrong, but I want to figure out why everybody feels like they are constantly talking past each other, and why the Assassin's Creed community feels more divided now than ever. This debate is arguably the most persistent conflict in the entire Assassin's Creed community, and it's the old games versus newer games debate. It's a cycle that never seems to end, no matter which game had just come out. The conversation will always circle back to this divide. On one side, you have the older fans who feel the franchise has lost its identity. They would point to the likes of storytelling being a downgrade, the lore, the iconic protagonists who made Assassin's Creed what it is, the dense city settings and a time when parkour was a core mechanic instead of something being patched in post-launch. In the older games, social stealth was a pillar of gameplay, and the experience did not revolve around loot rarities or optimizing what the best gear set is. You could just jump into a sequence and truly feel like an assassin without being forced to grind side content for hours upon end. Now for many people, that focused design is exactly what made Assassin's Creed special. The games were not perfect, we can admit that, but they had a clear, distinct vision. On the other side, it's easy to see why the newer games have such a massive following. The worlds are breathtakingly large, the RPG systems are expansive, I guess the combat can be seen as more engaging and more hands-on, and there is far more freedom in how you can approach certain things. Now while the level design might not be as specialized as stealth as it once was, the RPG systems allow you to tailor the experience to your own playstyle. Now for a huge part of the player base, that level of customization and scale adds a lot of replay value. Both sides have valid points, but the problem arises when they start talking past each other, assuming one side is wrong and missing the point entirely. The real problem, or at least to me, is that both sides are looking at these games with completely different expectations. Older fans want Assassin's Creed to return to the way they remember it, a franchise that once had a clear identity with some sort of continuity from one game to the next. Newer fans might not care about that at all, they just want a big open world that keeps them busy for a long time, regardless of whether the writing is great or not. Now, apart from the formula being changed by shifting the genre, it also changed who the games were made for, and that's where the disconnect really starts to show. Assassin's Creed stopped being about learning and mastering its systems, and started being about keeping you playing as long as possible to a live service approach. You also had gear, you had levels, map sizes that became the focus. And for people who started Assassin's Creed with the RPG era, that's just what Assassin's Creed is to them. There's nothing missing because they've never experienced the older design. But for longtime fans, that shift feels like the franchise slowly drifting away from what made it stand out in the first place. So when these two groups argue, they're not really talking about quality. They're just talking past each other. One side of the Assassin's Creed fandom is asking if it still feels like Assassin's Creed, and the other side is asking if they're having fun. Now, until that gap gets acknowledged, this debate is always going to keep looping, no matter how many new games come out. And then there's the modern day, which might be the most divided topic in the entire franchise. This is the part of Assassin's Creed that people either genuinely care about or actively want gone. And unlike the old versus new gameplay debate, this argument cuts way deeper, as this is about why Assassin's Creed even exists in the first place. Now, for the Assassin's Creed fans who have been around since the beginning, the modern day was never some side feature. It was quite literally the backbone of the franchise. The Animus was a story device that explained why we were reliving these memories and why failure meant desynchronization instead of a traditional game over. Desmond Miles tied everything together. Ezio's story not only mattered in the past, but it also mattered in the present. Now, without that, you're not really playing a sci-fi conspiracy game anymore. You're just playing a historical experience with no larger purpose. For people like myself, the modern day is the soul of Assassin's Creed, and watching it get pushed aside over the years feel like the franchise slowly losing its narrative spine. But then, at the same time, if you look at it from a newer player's perspective or even a more casual fan, it kind of makes sense why they feel completely differently. You're locked into a pirate fantasy, or roaming ancient Greece, or living out as a Viking, and suddenly the game puts you out to walk around in the modern day and read some emails. For those players, the modern day kills momentum. They did not buy a game to play as somebody in the present day. They brought it to be a pirate, a Spartan, a Viking. When that immersion gets interrupted by sci-fi terms and characters they have no attachment to, their instinct is to rush through it or skip it entirely. This is where things start getting ugly, because these two groups want opposite things. The conversations turn pretty dismissive very fast. Newer fans will call the modern day boring filler that should be removed. Older fans will fire back and say those people don't understand Assassin's Creed, and I'll admit I've been guilty of that myself. I've said before, the modern day is so essential, and if somebody doesn't see that, they don't get the franchise. Now, was I wrong about its importance? No. Objectively, it is important for the franchise. But was I dismissive? Absolutely. A lot of this really comes back to Ubisoft. They have not helped the situation at all. By trying to satisfy everybody, they ended up satisfying nobody. The modern day gets pushed into comics or watered down into vague simulations, and now with things like the Animus Hub, it feels like the story is being stripped down and handed back to you as optional reading. For people who care about the lore, it feels hollow. Once again, it's the same problem. Is Assassin's Creed a sci-fi story about humanity's future, or is it just a historical anthology? Until that question gets answered, the modern day will always be one of the biggest sources of discourse and toxicity within this community. Another big reason the Assassin's Creed community stays broken is expectations, and a lot of that comes straight from how Assassin's Creed is marketed right now. The arguments don't actually start when the games come out. They start months earlier, sometimes a full year earlier, when the trailers drop and, leaks and rumors spread. Ubisoft says just enough to let people fill in the gaps themselves, and that's where the trouble begins. You'll get one group hearing phrases like return to roots, and immediately picture something closer to the older games. Meanwhile, another group sees the same trailer and focuses on how big the map is, the hours of content, and so on. Both groups walk away thinking the game is made specifically for them, even though they're imagining completely different experiences. By the time the game actually comes out, a version of it already exists in everybody's head. So when reality doesn't exactly line up with that imagined version, people might feel misled. That frustration then turns into anger, and that anger gets aimed at other fans as much as it does at Ubisoft. You will see it all the time in the comment section, quote unquote, this isn't real Assassin's Creed. You guys hype this up for no reason, stuff like that. At that point, it's not even about the games anymore, it's about broken expectations. You can see this happening right now with the Black Flag remake. The moment rumors started saying the combat would lean into the RPG side of things, the community split instantly. Some people already hate it without seeing a second of gameplay, because to them, the RPG combat automatically means Assassin's Creed losing its identity again. On the other side, there are people who love the RPG systems and think Black Flag with deeper combat sounds great. Now, at the point of me making this video, the game isn't even officially announced or shown, and people are already at each other's throats. The same thing is happening with Hexe. Rumors say the protagonist will have magic, and immediately people jump to literal magic, as in spellcasting. Now, for a lot of people, that's a hard line. But, knowing Assassin's Creed, that magic is probably just some sort of ancient first civilization technology framed differently. Still, expectations are already locked in, and that's all it takes. Even Assassin's Creed Jade has this problem right now. It's a game that's not even out yet, but opinions are already cemented. Some people want nothing to do with a mobile open world RPG. Other people are more excited about this game than the likes of Hexe, because the RPG style has a massive fan base right now. Once again, two completely different expectations and same franchise. What makes it worse is that Assassin's Creed marketing tries to speak to everybody at once. It wants to reassure longtime fans while still selling to the RPG crowd. Now, instead of setting clear expectations, it just creates mixed signals, and mixed signals create arguments. So when release day happens, nobody actually talks about what the game does well or poorly. They argue over what they thought it was supposed to be. And that's how every new Assassin's Creed game ends up feeling like a disappointment to a lot of people, before the dust has even settled. Now, outside of the games themselves being the main focus of discussion, this also extends to the Assassin's Creed creator space. A lot of people probably don't think about it, but the creator space around this franchise actually matters. Every big video game franchise has one, and a creator space helps shape how the community talks about the games. Now, just a heads up, any names in this video that I mention from this point on, please don't take this the wrong way, and also don't spread any negativity towards these people. Now, if you have been following Assassin's Creed content lately, especially on YouTube, things are not that great in terms of creativity. I'll be the first to admit that. Right now, the biggest creator that's tied to the franchise is Raptor. I've met him before in Bordeaux. He's a super cool person and a great creator. But you see, when the largest voice in the Assassin's Creed space is entirely focused on one genre of the franchise, I think it naturally contributes to why the franchise feels so split when it comes to online discussions. Sometimes I personally feel a bit disconnected when he speaks heavily into things such as damage numbers or helix packs or weekly resets, stuff like that. For me, those aren't priorities for Assassin's Creed and have never been. What I care about the most is the franchise improving as a whole. Things like fixing the modern day storyline again, having stronger storytelling, having more motion capture, continuity actually meaning something again. I do sometimes wonder why somebody like a Raptor, who clearly has access and connections, doesn't really push that kind of feedback towards the developers or writers more openly, instead of, oh, I want damage numbers or I want a big cool new weapon. At the same time, I understand why it happens. Newer players gravitate towards gear and optimization because that's what the RPG era emphasizes, and a massive creator such as Raptor who focuses on that is responding to the audience that they have. But the result is that the creator space ends up mirroring the same split the franchise has. Systems and numbers on one side and, identity and the storytelling on the other. And that disconnect doesn't help the community at all, it just reinforces it. On the other side, you've got creators like Master Assassin, someone who clearly cares about Assassin's Creed as a franchise across both the older and newer games. Over time, you could see the burnout set in for him. He openly said that he was tired of Assassin's Creed, and since then his uploads have been very inconsistent. He was somebody that I looked up to when it came to YouTube, so to see him disappear and post only around 1 or 2 videos every month or two is a bit upsetting. And then there are the OG creators like Lasers and Fishy, who used to be major pillars of the Assassin's Creed content. Eventually they moved on too, largely because the franchise changed so much that it didn't feel like the same thing they originally fell in love with. There's also Luma, a respectable Assassin's Creed YouTuber who used to interview the developers, and he just vanished off the face of the earth. Right now, there are still plenty of Assassin's Creed creators, don't get me wrong, but they just don't get the attention. I think Willis Makes Movies is my #1 for Assassin's Creed discussions. There's also Marco Rose, who talks about the lore in great depth. There's The Seal, who discusses the more technical side of Assassin's Creed. But all of these channels are not getting what I would think is the attention that they deserve, and it confuses me. That's kind of where Assassin's Creed YouTube is at right now, a fragmented creator space that mirrors a fragmented franchise. And honestly, I don't even know how long I'll be going before I feel that same Assassin's Creed fatigue creeping in. It wouldn't surprise me if more Assassin's Creed creators quietly disappear over time. And here's where things really start to fall apart, and that's TikTok. A lot of the biggest Assassin's Creed creators over there lean heavily into algorithm-driven content. Most of it ends up being creators reading comments from their live chats and firing back with deliberately controversial opinions. And one of the most common ones you will hear is that people only like the older games because of the word nostalgia. And I'll be honest, the word nostalgia has become one of my least favorite words in the community. Not because it doesn't apply, it absolutely can. I mean, childhood TV shows, old movies, things like that, sure. But when discussing Assassin's Creed, the word nostalgia is often used to shut things down instead of opening things up. Instead of asking why people feel a certain way, it just ends the conversation on the spot. Since joining TikTok recently, I noticed the vibe there is very different and often way more hostile. A lot of that probably comes down to the younger audience. Opinions that challenge the dominant viewpoint tend to get brushed off pretty quickly, and nostalgia is the go-to dismissal. You know, this might sound crazy to say, but it wouldn't surprise me if there's some sort of smear campaign going on TikTok to ridicule the older games. Now, the biggest Assassin's Creed creator on TikTok is named AC Johnny. He primarily focuses on the RPG era just like Joraptor, but in a different way. And just to be clear, please don't use this as an excuse to send him any hate. He seems like a pretty cool guy. I just simply find many of his takes on the franchise to be mendacious. I mean, for example, listen to this clip.
And if you say something like the Ezio games are better, I promise you it's nostalgia. I promise you it is.
Notice how dismissive that is? You see, statements like that don't invite discussion, they just shut things down. And when a creator such as AC Johnny with a massive audience frame things that way, it spreads fast. You can open up his comment section and see it firsthand. Once nostalgia gets labelled as the explanation by the creator, this will pile on, and longtime fans are immediately written off. The same thing happens when he talks about Black Flag, another game much like the Ezio trilogy that's widely considered the best of the franchise.
That's how you know it's all just nostalgia. People just say whatever they want to just like, they'll justify their favorite however they will.
Again, nostalgia gets brought up as the reason people rate it so highly. That's why these conversations start to feel disingenuous. It stops being about understanding the different perspectives that people have, and it just turns into talking past each other. But it goes a step further. Take a look at this final clip.
I play these games every day, more than anybody. So, respectfully, nobody knows ball like I do. Nobody. Nobody can tell me what's what. Nobody's opinion is more valid than mine unless you log more hours on Assassin's Creed than me. And that's just it. That's just it.
That kind of thinking is what we call gatekeeping. Playtime does not automatically mean somebody understands Assassin's Creed better. If it did, I could turn around and argue I know more about this guy because I've been playing longer, but that would be ridiculous. Now, AC Johnny, if you're watching this, which I know you will, I'm not trying to dogpile you, but when you have a big platform, how you frame your discussions matter a lot. Writing off older games and older fans as nostalgic creates a divide that doesn't need to exist. I get that hot takes and saying controversial things do well for the TikTok algorithm, I get that. And maybe I'm the naive one for wanting something more thoughtful. I just think the Assassin's Creed community as a whole would be better off having real conversations, instead of constantly picking sides and dismissing the other. So yeah, that's kind of where I land on all of this. I don't think Assassin's Creed has a toxic community because people care too much. I just think the community is toxic because people care in completely different ways, and nobody ever slows down enough to acknowledge that. Everybody's arguing from their own version of what Assassin's Creed is supposed to be, and once you lock into that, it's really hard to hear anything else. Now, I'm not going to say one side is right and the other is wrong. I have played these games for a very long time. I've got my own biases and I've definitely been part of a problem before. At the end of the day, it's Ubisoft. They're going to keep making the games that they want to make. The franchise is going to keep changing. That part is inevitable. What isn't inevitable is how we talk to each other about it. Assassin's Creed can be flawed, and it can be inconsistent, we know that, but it can still be worth caring about. I just wish more conversations about this franchise were about understanding why people feel the way they do, instead of trying to win every argument.